Orientation Day at the Interspecies Academy. The lumen ring turned slowly above the blue-white curve of a quiet world, and the station's light panels made the corridors glow like morning on every planet. At once new students poured from shuttles, their robes marked with the colors of dozens of worlds, some with feathers, some with scales, some floating on gas-filled sacks, all carrying data pads and eyes full of wonder, because this was the first academy in the Orion Reach where every species could learn together in peace, or at least that was the plan. Humans had joined last cycle, and everyone still whispered about them. They came from what aliens called a death world, a place of storms, poisoned skies, and gravity that broke bones. The rumors said humans could survive anything. So when the transport hatch opened and 5 humans stepped out, most of the crowd stared in half fear, half curiosity. One of them, a tall woman with short hair and a small medical pack slung over her shoulder, smiled wide and waved like she was greeting old friends. Her name was Tessa Vane from Earth, and she was here to study xenobiology, but her real passion was field medicine. Behind her came 3 others joking about cafeteria food, and one quiet guy scanning the layout map, like a soldier reading a battle plan. The first day was bright and confusing. The aliens moved carefully around the humans as if they might explode at any second. But Tessa only laughed and asked friendly questions about food and home. Worlds, her energy broke the tension until a small accident changed everything in the shared chemistry lab. An alien student named Vrel from the water world Teth slipped on a wet patch of condensed air and cut his fin against a sharp table edge. A deep red-green fluid spilled out. He screamed and several students froze. No one moved, waiting for the med drones to arrive, because on most worlds that was the rule: do nothing, wait for help. Tessa did not wait. She grabbed her pack, knelt beside Vrel, and pressed her bare hands against the wound. Aliens gasped at the sight of human skin touching blood, but she said, "Hold still, it's okay, I got you." The alien trembled and whispered, "Drones will come soon, but she said they take too long, you'll bleed out, just keep still." She tore the edge of her own uniform sleeve and wrapped it tight above the wound, making a pressure bandage. Her voice calm, her eyes sharp. Other humans helped. One lifted Vrel's head. Another wiped fluid from the floor. Someone sealed the cut with a polymer patch from the emergency kit. When the drones finally arrived, they found the bleeding already controlled and the alien stable. The lead medic bot scanned the scene and made a digital chirp that translated to, "Intervention unauthorized, please refrain from physical treatment." But Vrel's heart rate returned to normal, and he breathed steady again. The next day the story spread through the station. The alien students whispered that humans used pain and chaos to heal, that they pressed their hands into wounds, that they wrapped cloth instead of using drones. The Dean of Safety called an emergency assembly to warn everyone that human-style first aid was dangerous for non-humans and could cause social panic. But curiosity was stronger than fear. Some students approached Tessa in the cafeteria asking why she did what she did. She smiled and said, "Where I'm from, we don't wait when someone's hurt. We move, we fix. We stop the bleeding first and think later, because sometimes later means never." Alien with translucent skin asked, "But what if you make it worse?" And Tessa said, "Worse than dying, maybe. But if you don't try, they're gone for sure." Her tone soft, but sure. The alien stared at her, small hands with tiny scars along the fingers. Signs of old work, old burns and cuts from real fights with survival. And in that moment they realized humans were not fearless because they felt no fear. They were fearless because they acted. Even when they were afraid, that night the aliens talked quietly in the dorms. Some said humans were reckless. Others said maybe they were brave, but all agreed that these strange creatures from a deadly world were unlike anyone else they had met. And Tessa, asleep in her bunk, dreamed of home where storms rolled over oceans and people kept going no matter what. Because that was what humans did, they kept going. And they kept each other alive. Lessons in calm and blood. The next week, the lumen ring felt different. The alien students who once avoided the humans now watched them closely. Curiosity stronger than caution, and whispers followed Tessa wherever she went in the long corridors lined with glass walls showing the stars. Students of every color and shape moved between classes while screens announced safety lectures about interspecies medical protocol. But even as the words scrolled across the halls, everyone remembered the girl who used her bare hands to stop bleeding and Who did not wait for drones, the academy instructors decided to turn the attention into a lesson. They called it Calm and Containment. A session inside the gravity gym where students could train for accidents and small emergencies. Each group had one human, one alien, and one observer to record behavior. The exercise was simple. Simulate a mechanical failure and see who could maintain calm under pressure. When the test started, everything went as planned until a vibration pulse snapped through. The floor, a real system fault in the grav control panels, threw half the class into sudden weightlessness, then slammed them back down again. The air filled with shouts and panic. One student, a long-limbed creature named Kale, hit the wall and twisted, his leg landing hard. The others froze because med drones were still on standby waiting for confirmation. But Tessa was already moving across the floor, her boots magnetized with a click. She reached Kale, who was panting. His lower limb bent at a strange angle, she said quietly. "Stay still and tell me where it hurts." Kale hissed near the joint. "It is wrong, it is broken." Tessa touched gently along the limb and said, "No, it's not broken, it's a sprain, we can fix this." She looked around, saw a stack of training manuals floating in low gravity, grabbed 2 of them and her roll of tape from the pack and said, "Help me hold it straight." The other humans knew the rhythm already. They steadied Kale's body while Tessa pressed the improvised splints against the joint and wrapped it firm, and even her voice steady. Like she was humming a song, the aliens around them stared wide-eyed at the simple, calm movement, expecting panic or shouting. But there was only quiet order. She said to Kale, "Breathe slow in through the nose, out through the mouth. Count with me, 1, 2, 3. Keep breathing, because when you control breath, you control fear." Kale followed, trembling at first, then slower. The pain easing a little. Tessa said, "See, not so bad. Now we wait for the swelling to go down. You did good." The instructors finally arrived, drones humming and scanners flashing, but the emergency was already handled. Afterward, during the debrief, the alien observers wrote that the humans demonstrated coordinated action, minimal verbal confusion, and high empathy levels. One instructor asked Tessa how she stayed calm under stress. She smiled and said, "My grandmother taught me when I was small. She was a nurse during the great storms back home. She told me, when you see someone hurt, check the scene. Stop the bleeding, protect the brain and spine, keep them breathing, keep them talking, and never let them think they are alone." That's what I did. It just becomes habit after a while. The instructor blinked, trying to record the steps on his pad, repeating them like strange magic words. Check scene, stop bleeding. Protect brain and spine, keep breathing. Keep talking. Keep hope. That night in the dorms, Kale and his friends talked about what they saw. Kale said, "Humans don't freeze, they move before thinking. It's like they know time itself listens to them." Another said, "Maybe they are too used to danger." But Piresh, the quiet student who loved to record things, said, "No, it's not danger, it's care. They care so hard it scares them. And that's why they act first while others plan, and maybe that's what makes them strong." He began compiling the recordings he took of Tessa's work, arranging them into a small study titled Instinctive Empathy Among Deathworld Species. Later that week, Tessa found Kale at the observation deck, walking slowly with a cane. She asked, "How's the leg?" He smiled with his glowing eyes and said, "Better than before." "Thank you, human." She laughed and said, "Call me Tessa." He nodded and said, "I will never forget how you helped me. Even when I was afraid." She looked out at the stars and said, "Fear is fine. What matters is what you do." While afraid, that's the only difference between surviving and not surviving. He thought about that a long time. In the following days, the alien students began to mimic the humans. Small gestures, quick checks of each other's equipment, simple first aid practice using straps and pads instead of waiting for drones. The instructors were confused, but could not stop it. Something about human calm had started to spread across the academy. A quiet infection of courage and care in every corner of the lumen ring. And even though many still whispered the word Deathworlder with awe and unease, more and more began to understand that maybe humanity's danger was not in their violence, but in how fiercely they refused to let anyone die alone. The field trip in the Silent Zone. The Academy's rotation brought the annual field trip, and this year the destination was the research moon called Halvan 9. a quiet outpost orbiting a gas giant with pale rings stretching across its sky. Students from every department were excited to see real laboratories beyond the safety of the lumen ring. Tessa and her group were assigned to study mineral microbes that thrived in low-gravity caves, while the alien students chatted about light spectra and crystal memory growth. Tessa carried her usual small medical kit strapped to her side like a habit she could not break. They laughed about it, saying, "You bring that thing everywhere." She just smiled and said, "I like being ready." The trip began calm. The shuttles glided through the clouds and landed in the dome habitat. The instructors gave them tasks: collect samples, record readings, stay inside perimeter. It was supposed to be simple. Then the station alarms screamed a sound deep and vibrating. The walls themselves shook. Micrometeors struck the outer shell like iron hail fragments of rock and ice, slicing through cable arrays. Lights flickered and gravity buckled. Half the dome lost power and the air pressure warning blinked red. Instructors shouted orders: "Stay together, remain calm." But comlinks snapped silent as the storm of debris cut them off from orbit. Inside the dim corridors, students panicked. Some tried to reach the emergency shelters. Others froze, unable to decide. Tessa took one look around and said, "We need to keep everyone breathing. That's priority one." She grabbed a flare light and started checking rooms, her voice steady as ever, calling names: Kale, Paresh, Vrel. "Come on, move toward me." Follow the light. They regrouped near the central hub where air still flowed from backup vents. One alien student lay slumped against the wall, shallow breaths and a dark bruise spreading along the chest. Tessa knelt, feeling for pulse. It was weak. She whispered to Paresh, "He has internal pressure building." The others stared wide-eyed, unsure what that meant. The cold crept in as heat loss began, condensation turning to frost along the walls. Tessa said, "We have to seal this module, or we'll freeze before help comes." They used tables and sample crates to block vents and cracks, humans and aliens side by side, stacking materials, their movements clumsy but full of purpose. She took the emergency blankets from her pack and wrapped them around the injured student, then ordered everyone to huddle close to share body heat. The aliens hesitated, their cultures considered touch sacred, but one by one they moved closer, guided by her calm tone. Hours passed with no rescue signals. The injured student's breathing worsened, his chest rising unevenly. Paresh pointed, shaking, saying, "He's dying." Tessa bit her lip, thinking fast. She said, "It could be a collapsed lung. We need to relieve pressure before it crushes his heart." The aliens recoiled. "You can't open him. Not without a med bay," she said. "Then we do it our way." She tore a thin tube from a water pack and attached the valve with tape, her hands moving with sure rhythm like someone fixing a broken engine. She cleaned the area with sterilizing gel, pressed the end of the tube gently into the wound until a soft hiss of trapped air escaped. Then she covered it with a clear patch. Air began to flow easier, and color returned to his face. Paresh's eyes filled with tears, half fear, half awe, whispering, "How did you—" "No," she said, "I didn't know. I guess the logic made sense, and sometimes that's enough." Her words simple, yet they carried weight, the kind that sticks in the mind long after the moment passes. They waited together, singing softly in different languages to stay awake until rescue arrived, when the doors finally burst open and drones flooded in. Scanning with bright lights, they found the group alive, cold and exhausted, but alive. When they returned to the lumen ring, the instructors questioned every detail. The aliens repeated what they saw. The way humans turned fear into motion, the way they used anything around them to save a life. The reports called it primitive field improvisation, but every alien who was there knew it was more than that. It was something fierce and kind at the same time. Paresh began compiling a full record, naming it the Silent Zone Rescue, and for the first time the Academy placed human methods not as reckless acts, but as examples of adaptive response. Later that night, Tessa sat alone by the viewport watching the stars, her hands still trembling from the memory. And she thought about her grandmother again, about the rule she always said: check scene, stop bleeding, protect life, and keep hope alive. She smiled softly to herself and whispered, "We did that today." And out in the halls, alien students passed each other and said, "Maybe the Death Worlders aren't crazy. Maybe they just love life more than the rest of us." Lines we crossed to save life. The days after the Silent Zone incident changed everything on the lumen ring. The students who once looked at humans with fear now stared with quiet awe. The word spread fast through the academy that Tessa and her group had saved lives with their bare hands, and no one could forget the way she worked with calm when everyone else froze. Some called it instinct, others called it madness. But whatever name they used, it began to reshape how the academy thought about danger and care. Still, there were some who did not like this new idea. The administration worried that humans were teaching others to break rules that kept people safe. They feared more accidents, more improvisation, more chaos. So they began new policies forbidding field medicine without supervision. Tessa listened in silence during the meeting when the dean explained that such reckless behavior might harm students. She only said softly, "If we waited for drones, they would be dead." The dean frowned and said, "Procedure protects lives." Tessa replied, "No, it protects comfort. There is a difference." The room went quiet. No one dared answer, but in the hallways afterward, the whispers began again. Not of fear this time, but of admiration, because the aliens who had once been helpless now practiced what she taught them in small groups. They learned how to stop bleeding with pressure, how to keep breathing steady, and how to act instead of panic. The academy could not stop the flow of knowledge that came from survival itself. Then came the day that tested everything. A supply ship bringing equipment to the station drifted off course. A piece of debris tore through its hull, and the emergency klaxon screamed across the lumen ring. The docking bay filled with smoke and fire alarms. Students ran in every direction and the air began to thin as oxygen leaked through cracks the med drones launched. But the smoke confused their sensors. They hovered blind and useless. Tessa was in the cafeteria when the first tremor hit. She grabbed her pack and ran before anyone could tell her to stay back. Others followed Kyle Pyrish and two new alien cadets from distant worlds together. They reached the docking ring where heat shimmered and the air tasted like metal. Inside, they found chaos. A cargo loader had fallen, crushing a crew member under the frame. The others were trapped behind debris. Tessa dropped to her knees and called to Kale. "Help me lift," but the weight was too heavy. She said, "We need leverage. Find pipes. Find bars. Anything." Strong, they searched and returned with metal rods sliding them under the edge, and together they heaved with all their strength, muscles shaking until the trapped worker gasped a breath. Tessa pulled him free. Blood running down his side, she pressed her hands against the wound and said, "Hold still, stay awake with me, don't close your eyes," while Pyresh wrapped his scarf tight as a bandage. The fire licked the walls and Kale shouted, "We need to move before the air goes." Tessa said, "Not yet, not." Leaving anyone, she turned toward the wreckage where another voice whimpered. She crawled through the gap, ignoring the heat, her fingers raw against the sharp edges. She found a small alien mechanic pinned beneath a twisted beam, barely conscious. She tried to pull him out, but the metal would not move. She shouted for help, but her team could not reach her. The fire crackled closer. She took a breath and pushed the beam with every ounce of strength until her arms burned, and something shifted enough for the body to slide free. She dragged him out, coughing smoke filling her lungs. And when they reached the corridor, she collapsed beside the others, gasping but smiling because they were alive. Later in the med bay, the official rescue teams finally arrived and began to treat the wounded. The commander of the station looked at Tessa, covered in soot and ash, and asked, "Why do you risk yourself for strangers?" She looked up, tired eyes bright with something fierce, and said, "Because if we do nothing, they die. And if we die trying, at least we tried." The commander said, "You humans always walk the line between bravery and madness." She smiled and said, "Maybe that line is where life really starts." The footage from the bay spread through the network, again showing humans and aliens working together side by side. No ranks, no orders, just raw instinct and care across species. For the first time, the Academy recognized human first aid training as an official elective class, and Tessa was asked to teach it. She agreed on one condition: that anyone could join, because helping life was not a human gift alone. It was a choice. Every thinking being could make. From that day on, the lumen ring echoed with new voices, counting breaths, practicing pressure, holds, and repeating her words. Stay calm, move fast, keep hope alive. And for the first time, aliens began to believe that maybe Deathworlders were not just survivors but teachers of courage itself. A door through the dark. The academy quieted after the fire, yet something unseen moved through its halls, a kind of awakening. The alien students no longer watched the humans from a distance. They trained beside them, learning every motion, every technique that turned fear into action. But one evening, an alert arrived across the Lumen Ring communication down in Sector 12 power grid, flickering strange interference in the outer maintenance tunnels. The instructors called it a routine check, but the humans felt the weight of wrongness in the air. Tessa volunteered at once, saying, "We can handle diagnostics." The dean refused, but when the lights failed again, they sent her team anyway. The tunnel stretched deep under the habitat ring, dim lights flashing red. Along curved metal walls, their footsteps echoed through the emptiness, the hum of the generators fading into cold silence. Piresh held a scanner, its surface pulsing weakly. He said, "There is interference. No signal returning." Kael looked ahead into the dark and said, "Maybe a magnetic surge," Tessa said, "or maybe something worse." "Keep close." They moved forward step by step until the tunnel opened into a service chamber, half collapsed from old damage. A door half buried under rubble pulsed faintly. With blue light, it was an old experimental section sealed decades ago before the academy was even built. Kael brushed the dust and said, "There is writing here. Unauthorized zone. Do not enter." Tessa stared at the flickering sign and said, "Then that is exactly where we need to go." They pried the door open with rods and crawled inside, the air dry and metallic. The walls covered in old data panels half alive. The blue light came from a containment pod in the center, filled with liquid and tangled. Cables inside floated a strange machine. Organic metal curved like ribs, pulsing slowly. Piresh whispered, "This is from before the academy. Something ancient." Tessa stepped closer and said, "Maybe it is the reason the power keeps failing." As she touched the control panel, the pod lights flared bright, then faded again, a low hum shaking the floor. Suddenly, a wave of cold rolled through the room. Systems across the academy flickered. Students screamed in other sections as power dipped. Tessa shouted, "Back to Kael, seal the door." But before he could, the lights cut out completely. Only the blue glow remained, flickering shadows across their faces. Piresh said, "Something is moving in the dark, a shape uncoiling from the corner where the cables met, the floor." It rose like smoke, forming into a figure not alive, not machine, whispering in broken signals. "Leave this place." Tessa stood her ground, heart hammering. She said, "We are here to fix what is broken." The shape flickered, confused, her voice steady. She said, "We came to save lives, not take them." It paused, its light dimming, then brightened again with a pulse like a heartbeat, before fading back into the pod. When the emergency lights returned, the pod went still. The power grid stabilized, and the hum of the station came back alive. Tessa slumped against the wall, breathing hard. Kael said, "What was that?" She shook her head and said, "Maybe a remnant. Maybe an old AI that forgot it was supposed to help." They returned to the upper decks, carrying data cores from the site for analysis, and by the time they reached the command level, the academy systems were stable again. But the story spread faster than any signal. Aliens whispered that the humans had gone into the dead tunnels and talked to the dark itself, and that the darkness had listened. Later, Piresh studied the recordings from his scanner, noticing something strange, faint patterns in the interference shaped like a heartbeat. He showed Tessa, who smiled faintly and said, "Maybe the dark just wanted someone to talk to. Maybe that is why it stopped when we didn't run away." She turned toward the viewport, watching the stars drift by, and added softly, "People fear the dark because they think it hides death, but maybe sometimes the dark is just waiting for someone to bring it back to life." Her words stayed with the others long after. The academy later sent inspection crews to the tunnels but found nothing, only silent machinery and scorched walls. Yet the power never failed. Again, the dean thanked Tessa for her bravery, though still unable to explain what truly happened. Students from every species gathered that night in the main hall, sharing stories about courage in the dark. Tessa sat quietly at the edge, listening, their faces bright with wonder and fear mixed together. She felt something growing in that moment, not pride but connection. The kind of bond forged only when people face the unknown together and walk out still breathing, still human, still alive. When The alarms would not stop. The lumen ring floated silent above the gas giant for many peaceful days after the incident. In the dark tunnels, the air was calm, the lights steady, the classes returned to their rhythm, and it almost felt as if nothing terrible could ever happen again. But peace on the station was always temporary, for life in the orbit of giants was never truly safe. And everyone knew it deep inside. One evening, while the students were gathered in the dining hall, a low tremor ran through the floor. The lights flickered once, then again. Then the alarms began to scream, a harsh, continuous sound that made hearts pound faster. The words flashed across every screen: docking sector in flames, fuel breach containment unstable. Evacuate immediately. The instructors froze for a moment too long before orders came through. But the humans were already on their feet. Tessa grabbed her medical pack. Kale and Paresh followed her, running down the corridor as smoke began to fill the air vents. The docking ring was chaos, bright red light spilling from ruptured panels, a fire roaring inside the main cargo tunnel, sparks showering across the deck. Students and workers stumbling blind through the haze. The med drones tried to hover, but the heat confused their sensors, spinning them in useless circles. Tessa shouted above the noise, "We need to form lines, seal the bulkhead, and get the injured clear." Her voice steady, cutting through the panic. She grabbed a fire suppression hose and opened it, spraying the foam into the blaze. Kale used a steel bar to pry open a half-jammed hatch, pulling out a trapped alien student whose skin had begun to blister. Paresh guided others toward the airlock, counting breaths and calling names one by one until he was coughing from the smoke. His translator failing in the roar of chaos, Tessa found a small group cornered near a collapsed wall, a worker pinned under fallen crates, and another kneeling beside him. Sobbing, she dropped beside them, touched the crushed leg, and said, "We can save him if we move fast." She called to Kale to lift, and together they pushed the debris aside, their hands raw, the metal scorching hot. The worker screamed, but Tessa only said, "Breathe with me. Keep talking. If you talk, you live." She wrapped his wound with her torn sleeve, using belts from their uniforms as straps. Her calm voice guiding everyone around her until the noise of fear turned into the rhythm of action. The aliens started to move, differently, not running, but helping. Two of them dragged hoses, another formed a line to pass extinguishers, and for the first time they all worked together without waiting for commands. As they cleared the area, another explosion shook the floor, and a beam came down, splitting the corridor into two parts, Tessa and Paresh on one side, Kale and the rest on the other, fire between them. Paresh coughed hard, saying, "We can't get through." She shouted back, "Stay with the injured. Get them out, Will." Find another way. She pulled Paresh by the arm toward a maintenance shaft, barely wide enough to crawl through inside. It was dark and full of smoke. The heat pressed against their skin. She said, "Keep low. Follow my voice and crawl." When they reached the other side, they emerged into the hangar control room, where the main containment panel flickered red. She ran to it, hands flying across the keys, trying to reroute power to the backup shields. The system warned that pressure was reaching critical. She said, "If we don't vent soon, the whole ring goes with us," Paresh said. "But the vent will blow the cargo pods." She said, "It's that, or everyone dies," and hit the release. The sound was like thunder as air burst from the outer docks, carrying fire. Into space, the pressure dropped fast, but the flames died with it, leaving only smoke and silence. She fell to her knees, coughing, lungs burning. Paresh helped her stand, his voice shaking. "You saved them." She looked around the ruined bay, the cracked walls, the scorched floor, and said, "We saved them, all of us." When the rescue teams finally arrived, guided by emergency beacons, they found survivors already organized in small groups, giving aid, each one following the human training count compressions. Stop the bleeding, keep breathing, keep hope alive. Later in the main hall, the dean looked over the wreckage and said, "Without your actions, half the station would have been lost." Tessa said, "Not just my actions. Everyone learned what to do, because we practiced and believed we could make a difference, even when afraid." The dean said, "You humans have a strange way of turning disaster into lessons." She smiled faintly and said, "Maybe that is what being human means, finding purpose in the middle of chaos." As the smoke cleared and the alarms finally fell silent, the lumen ring drifted through space, scarred but whole, its people forever changed by the night. The alarms would not stop, and yet neither did they. We all learned to be brave. The days after the fire were quiet on the lumen ring. The station moved slower, as if the metal itself was tired. The smell of smoke still clung to the corridors, even after the air filters ran for weeks. Classes resumed, but they felt different, softer, deeper, as if every lesson now carried the echo of what they had lived through. The aliens walked beside the humans, not as observers but as partners, greeting them with nods and open hands where there had once been distance. Now there was understanding. Tessa moved through the hallways with bandaged hands still healing from burns, yet her smile never faded. She was tired but proud. She knew something permanent had changed, and that the academy would never be the same again. A week later, the administration called a meeting in the central hall. Every student, every instructor, every worker gathered under the high dome, where the banners of all their worlds hung in bright colors. The dean stepped forward and said, "The Lumen Ring has survived what could have been our end, and it was not our machines that saved us, it was our people. Many lives were spared because of the courage and skill of those who acted without hesitation." Then he turned to Tessa and her team and said, "Your methods, once questioned, are now proven. Your spirit has taught us all a new way to think." He held up a small red patch embroidered with a simple white symbol of two hands holding a star. "This will mark every graduate who completes the new cross-species first aid program. It will remind us that help can come from any hand and that bravery is not a matter of world or birth. It is a choice." The hall erupted with applause that rolled like thunder through the air after the ceremony. Paresh found Tessa by the viewing window where the rings of the gas giant shimmered in gold light. He handed her his data pad, saying, "I finished the record. I called it Lessons from the Death Worlders." She laughed softly and said that title will scare them. He said maybe, but it will also make them listen. Inside the record he had written everything. He saw the panic, the calm, the choices, the pain, and the care. And at the end he wrote that the humans did not fight the universe with strength, but with heart they made the impossible ordinary by refusing to stop when others froze. Tessa read it and her eyes shone wet. She said, "You should be the one to teach next time." Paresh said, "I will, but only if you promise to stay nearby." Later that night, they gathered again, not in the hall but on the observation deck, where the glass stretched wide enough to see the curve of the world below. Small groups sat together sharing food, laughter, and quiet stories of fear turned into courage. The alien. Students who once whispered about humans being dangerous now asked them to show more techniques: how to make tourniquets, how to check pulse, how to speak steady words when everything feels lost. Tessa showed them each step with gentle patience, saying the same words her grandmother had taught her: check the scene, stop the bleeding, protect life, keep breathing, keep talking, keep hope alive. And as they practiced, she felt the station slowly healing, not just in metal but in spirit. As the artificial night fell over the Lumen Ring, the dean made one final broadcast to every corner of the academy, the message simple and clear. Today we honor those who acted when fear said to wait. We honor the hands that reached across species and saved one another. We honor the lesson that courage is not born in comfort, but in the moment we refuse to give up. And from that night the Lumen Ring became known across the sector as the Academy of Brave Hearts. And every world sent new students to learn not just science and history, but how to face danger with humanity. Years later, when Tessa prepared to leave the station to return to Earth, the students lined the docking bay holding small red patches on their sleeves. She walked among them, smiling each face. A reminder that courage had spread farther than she ever dreamed. Paresh stood at the front and said, "You changed us forever." Tessa shook her head and said, "No, you changed yourselves. You just needed someone to remind you how strong you already were." She stepped onto the shuttle, looking back one last time at the Lumen Ring shining like a halo above the planet, and whispered to herself, "We all learned to be brave." As the engines burned bright and the stars stretched into long silver lines, the Academy continued to spin slowly in the dark, carrying with it a new legacy of compassion, born from a death world and shared among the stars, a legacy that would never fade. Because the story of those who refused to wait and chose to act would live forever in the hearts of all who heard it. The legacy of courage time moved like a gentle river on the Lumen Ring. After Tessa left the station, the halls no longer echoed with alarms or cries of fear, but with the sound of training laughter and voices. Learning how to save lives, the Academy had changed completely. The humans who once arrived as strangers from a death world were now legends, their stories told in classrooms and written into manuals. The aliens wore the small red patches proudly. On their sleeves, a mark that said, "I will help, I will not wait. I will act." The words that Tessa spoke on her last day became the motto of the academy. Courage is not born in safety. It is found in motion. And every new student learned it from the first moment they stepped aboard. Pyresh became the head of the new program. He carried the same medkit Tessa once used, worn but carefully restored. He kept it as a reminder that true tools were not made of metal, but of will and heart. Under his guidance, the academy trained hundreds from across the stars. They learned to face accidents, fires, and storms together without fear and without hesitation. One day, a group of cadets from the far ice moons came running through the corridors shouting. There was an explosion in the reactor line. Everyone rushed, but there was no panic, only action. Calm and ordered, just like Tessa had taught years ago. Pyresh arrived to find the cadets already tending the wounded, wrapping pressure bands and keeping everyone breathing, and when he saw that the danger had been handled, he smiled and whispered, she would be proud. Outside, the station ships from other worlds came to study their methods, and soon every allied fleet began to train the same way, fast, practical, and full of compassion. People stopped calling humans reckless. They began to call them the heart of the galaxy. Because no matter how strange or fragile another being was, a human would reach out first. Not with fear, but with hope stories. Spread of miners on barren moons saving lives using the lumen ring techniques, and soldiers who laid down their weapons to tend to the wounded on both sides. The idea had grown beyond one academy. It had become a movement, a quiet, unstoppable force of empathy on Earth. Tessa walked along the shore of her home world, the ocean wind warm against her face. She watched the waves roll endlessly and thought of the stars she had left behind. Her communicator buzzed with a message from Pyresh. He sent a picture of the new graduates, rows of alien and human faces standing together in front of the academy banner, all wearing the red patch. He wrote only 3 words: we kept going, and she laughed softly, tears on her cheeks, because those were the same words her grandmother had told her long ago. Keep going no matter what, because that is what humans do. As the sun set over the ocean, she knelt down and pressed her hand against the sand, feeling the pulse of the planet beneath her. The same rhythm that beat in every heart she had met out there in the wide galaxy. She whispered a promise to the stars that humanity would never stop reaching, never stop caring, never stop saving, because life itself was worth every scar, every risk, every breath. She closed her eyes and saw the faces of all those she had saved and all those who had saved others after her, and she knew the story was no longer hers. It belonged to everyone who learned to stand in the dark and bring light back into it. The lumen ring continued its orbit, shining like a second sun above the gas giant, a symbol of what could happen when courage replaced fear and care replaced indifference every night. Its lights flashed a single bright signal across the stars, a reminder that even on the hardest worlds kindness could bloom, and that sometimes the smallest act of bravery could echo forever through the silence of space. The end.